Thank you very much for coming to this reading of excerpts from my latest novella, Olympia. And this novella is kind of a sequel to an earlier book I wrote entitled Venetian Rogues, and it follows the story of one of the major characters of Venetian Rogues forward. And I hope you'll find this interesting, and I will begin. The first excerpt is entitled A Father's Gift, from an earlier part of the book. He was ill, and they all knew it. His long life was coming to an end, fittingly and with little discomfort. It was time. But he worried for his only child, a daughter, and he wished, this taciturn and generous protector, to give her something. It wasn't a question of material goods or a remembrance designed to coerce a kind of commemoration. No, not at all. He wanted it, whatever it was, to help her to fend for herself in a world that was exploitative and devious, as well as occasionally kind. So he summoned Olympia to his bedside, brushed away her tears, and gave her a ring. It was a simple but striking specimen, a tapered gold band composed of 3 coil-like strands, in the center of which was set a small diamond. He asked Olympia to take it to their neighboring town, where there were 3 prominent jewelers, with the intention of a possible sale, and to report their assessments to him in detail when she returned. He had a price in mind, he said, as he sent her away, but she was under no circumstances to sell before she consulted him, no matter how much was offered. The young girl, believing it was her father's way of raising money for her, demurred, but her father insisted, and so she set out. The first jeweler, a small, wiry, clean-shaven and balding man with restless eyes, immediately pronounced the ring to be relatively worthless and could hardly be bothered handling the piece. "Is it from an unsuccessful engagement?" he sneered. Olympia blushed and stammered a no, and the jeweler offered a few coins, though he could hardly justify purchasing something that would do no credit to his establishment. "You see, dear child, the gold is quite impure, and the diamond, well, although the stone is real, that's the best I can say about it. It's hardly worth the bother of displaying. He must not have thought very highly of you if this is all he could come up with." Olympia thanked him coolly and left. At the next establishment, she found a man who was much friendlier and who treated her with great courtesy. He smiled and moved his considerable body deftly and used his chubby fingers with great skill as he examined the ring. But he confirmed that the gold was substandard and the diamond small and commonplace. And although he offered thrice as much as the first jeweler, it was an insignificant sum. At least he had made no offensive jokes. Olympia thanked him as well, in some perplexity, however, and prepared for her final visit. An elderly man greeted her, learned of her desires, and spent quite some time inspecting her ring. He coughed a bit and shuffled his way around his shop and used his eyepiece and scales and, when finished, addressed her. "Young lady, this is a remarkable piece of jewelry." "Oh," exclaimed Olympia, "that's not what the others said." "The others," he chuckled. "Well, of course not. They wouldn't know. But what did they tell you, that the gold was not very pure, the diamonds not very brilliant? And did they make an offer?" "Why, yes, that's what they said, and they did make offers, but not very much." "No, certainly not. And I can't say I'd blame them, because after all, we have businesses to run, and our margins are slim." "Who gave you the ring?" "My father." "And he needs money? Is he desperate?" "No, but he's ill, and he's old, and he told me not to accept any offers until I discussed them with him." "I see," said the elderly man, "and as you can see, I'm no longer young, unlike you." Olympia nearly blushed, and she instinctively reached out to retrieve the ring that lay on the jeweler's desk. "Yes, the gold is not so very pure, and the diamond not so very brilliant. But what you should know, dear child, is that this is a work of great beauty and very fine skill. The lines are exquisite. The gold has been worked to full advantage, and the diamond, wanting as it may be, has been cut with the greatest care, so that it has achieved its maximum potential to catch light and reflect it. No, I could never sell it. No one would recognize its worth, except the person with an eye for craft and skill and beauty and love. Whoever made it did so with great love, for he, or who knows, it may have been a woman, lavished the kind of care only love would justify for its creation. Tell your father that he is a fortunate man to have been bequeathed this ring, and that the person on whom he bequeaths it will be just as fortunate." The scar. She had lightly kissed her suitor on the threshold and bade him goodbye. He was young and impetuous, well-dressed, fairly intelligent, and quite possessive. He wished to know how she spent her time without him. She refused to countenance the request, so she stayed his lips with a fluttering kiss and sent the young man on his way. "But when can I see you again?" he asked. "Saturday afternoon." "A week away? I won't survive, my dear. Why not tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that?" "Don't be silly. Aren't you a busy man? I also have things to do." He left reluctantly, letting his hands linger on her hips and daring to extract another kiss, which the woman refused on this warm, humid evening in Catania. When she was sure he had gone, the woman collapsed in her bed. She was tired and drawn. She had lost a great deal of weight, which, though it enhanced her allure, weakened her. Not long before, she had fled to Sicily to escape the dregs of a disastrous adventure that ended with the recognition of her own failings, her own imagined needs aside from money. And money it was she needed now, not more love. Although this young man had a certain charm and gentility, perhaps he also had character. She deftly poured herself a large tumbler of whiskey, her chief source of nutrients these long summer days, and reviewed the plan she had prepared. The touring dance troupe of Russian vagabonds would perform in Catania in 2 days' time. After the show, a hodgepodge of Tchaikovsky, Rimsky, and Ravel, all to recorded music blaring from crackling speakers. The dancers would retreat to the nearest bar. One of them, in particular, a dark-haired, vulgar siren in the corps de ballet, a minor number, had a penchant for cocaine. So she knew from her former lover, who had since been spurned like a dog by this vulgarian interested mainly in his purse. There were many cautions against revenge, but she dismissed them easily and casually. No, in some cases revenge was just what the doctor ordered. Olympia, despite her state, knew how to dress and how to seduce. Her plan was simplicity itself. Follow the dancers from the green room to their chosen bar, flirt with the men, get the word out that she was a source of cocaine, and pay special attention to the vulgarian who would be sure to inquire. And when she did inquire, Olympia would lead her to the bathroom where, while she bargained a price and ultimately handed over the drug, she could deftly stab the dancer in the calf and make a hurried escape. Yes, it was a risky endeavor, but one that was well worth striving for. A well-placed thrust would hobble the Russian for years. The performance ended, and what a dreadful, tasteless performance it was. And Olympia took her post at the stage door. The dancers drifted out one by one, lit their cigarettes, and gathered together to decide where next to plunder. Olympia approached the troupe, praised them, and was quickly taken up by the stagehands as they set out for the nearest night spot, whose forgettable name Olympia never remembered. All that was necessary was to follow the plan. Once there, the revels began in earnest. Russians tend to drink, and the Russians that surrounded her as she played showed a great interest in her wares, the Bulgarian chief among them. In the bathroom, Olympia produced her cocaine. If the Russian could dance as well as her eyes, she would have been a formidable talent. But when Olympia saw those eyes up close, the eyes of a besotted, frenzied simpleton, she lost heart and left the woman to indulge herself. Back in the bar, simply to relieve the tension of a misguided stratagem gone thankfully awry, she danced and kissed and threw herself into the arms of any willing man, and she drank her fill. One of the gallants offered to walk her home, and as she prepared to repay him for his gallantry with her bed, gratis, the charming young suitor of 2 nights before appeared and sprang into action, dispatching the drunken Russian with ease before turning to Olympia in fury and with a knife. Holding her by the throat against her door, he choked her, and she, also weakened by drink, could hardly resist. The man ignored her pleading eyes, and with his right hand used his blade to etch a line into her left cheek, slowly, before spitting into her unconscious face. "Love," said Olympia to herself as she woke and ran her fingers across her wound. "I guess it serves me right." Chapter 11. No, my dear, I'm not finished. Not just yet. That small sketch of your life, the one you handed over to Marcello before your first elopement, I destroyed it as you requested, after I read it. It was painful reading it, and wonderful, and I wish I had deceived you and kept it hidden so that I might present it to you now. One's own words are, after all, the most enlightening, especially in hindsight. No wonder Marcello flew with you despite the destruction he would cause, the destruction you must have known he would cause because of these words. Was it an act of evil, of revenge? You must have known that Marcello would leave Emilia and their unborn child. Was that part of the bargain? Or were you simply giving him a choice when you yourself had none? Good, evil, the in-between, they are somehow always together. I've made my choices too, choices that always seemed, at the time, the only way to go, like fate. I remember just about everything you wrote. I've convinced myself of this at least, and I've lived with these words of yours echoing for years, and I will try at long last to resurrect it for you and for me. I hope I won't be pulling a Joyce and producing, as he did with his Molly Bloom, a fetching facsimile, a seductive masquerade. But you will have to be the judge, and no one else. I hope the voice, your voice through me, is close enough to yours to be acceptable. Dearest man, when I agreed to take you on at Donato's request, to meet with you for those peculiar assignations, for those 6 months, I was curious, and you were paying well. At first, you were like all of the others, smitten, bashful, and full of lust, younger than my usual. I didn't think much about what might transpire as I took my station during those early weeks, and as you thawed. We had a plan, a program, a business arrangement to be kept. You had your words, and I had my respect. I have been waiting now for weeks to hear from you again. Donato has told you, and for some reason, dearest Marcello, you are keeping away. I don't want what you may think. Although maybe I do, maybe I don't. I'm not sure what I think and feel these long, impossible days. I'm puzzled, Marcello. I heard your flourishing art. I followed its course. Behind my impassive smile, I was breathless with wonder and grateful that my beauty, that something about me had brought this change about. Your lust dissolved as your rhapsodies entranced the two of us, and as I dwindled into a shadow. Do you remember that last month? I stopped wearing perfume. I wanted you to inhale my scent, my musk. Surely you knew that I was wet. Surely you sensed my arousal, though what you couldn't know was that through this aching anguish, my little personal world was being transformed at its essence. I was growing into my diminishing body's cataclysmic intimacy with what I regarded as myself, my soul. Through you, I discovered what words that are free in their inventiveness, in their expression, untrammeled by form or convention, I have found what they can do. If you knew what it took at our last meeting for me to prohibit your tender caress, that ever so slight shaking of my head nearly killed me as I lay there, wan and thin and paralyzed with yearning. It could be no other way. No, Marcello, I don't love you, not yet. I love your words. I love what happened as you grew and as I listened. I loved you for what you, unknowing, allowed me to become. Surely I will see you soon. Surely I will have your ear, and while I wait, I'll try my hand at writing what I want so desperately to say. I am a ghost, a waif, a shade, a shadow, not an angel yet, though I aspire to be. They first began to come to me after my mother died. I heard her coughing from the makeshift bedroom during her dying days. Father and the doctor wouldn't allow me to hug her because of her sickness, but I sneaked into the room anyway, late at night, and cried into her arms. Her arms grew weak after a while, and I could no longer feel her breathing on my cheek, and that's when the angels first came. 2 of them lifted her up and carried her far into the night sky, and 2 led me back to my bed and sat with me until morning, until Father discovered what was left of my mother, the insignificant part of her, cold and rigid, so unlike herself. He held my hand at the funeral, and before they closed the coffin lid, he groaned, squeezed my hand harder, and then began to cry, softly. I was happy for my mother, knowing she was in fine company, and the body that was cold and hard was someone else. That's what I learned about bodies, cold and hard and something else, like mine. Father was not a mother, though he tried to be, and being kind and affectionate was his nature. But even when I sat on his knee and nestled into the crook of his neck, and he stroked my hair as he read, I flew away. Who was this girl? Who was this weakening man? The angels came quite frequently in those early days, bringing my mother along to keep me comfort during the long nights. I tried to tell Father, but he seemed confused. He went on teaching, bringing me to school. He tried to encourage me to play with other children, but I could see they wanted nothing to do with a shadow like myself. Every morning was an ordeal, but I took pleasure in watching Father shave and dress, always a suit and tie, always with a lovely, sparkling diamond ring on the third finger of his right hand. And my teachers always greeted him with courtesy. And every Sunday, he escorted me to church, the highlight of my week, the only place aside from my room where I could feel secure. And there I could sing. My voice was clear and high, and I thrilled myself with it, and others too. The faces of the saints, the statues of the Virgin, the apostles, of Christ, they were my true companions. I urged Father to tell me their stories, and he tried, dear man, though his heart was broken and elsewhere. I knew he worried about me. I knew he thought I was peculiar, and I knew he loved me, but that he loved my mother more. Mother always asked about him when she visited, and her sweet fragrance filled my room as we talked. She let me say anything and everything I wished until I fell asleep, but soon she ceased to come. To myself I grew duller and even more shadowy as I approached my 12th birthday, ignorant of the basic facts of menstruation, which terrified me, and the insistent new urges that took hold of my feeble body and the changes that began to occur. But to others, even to Father, I became someone to behold, someone even to be with, though I most always preferred to be alone. On occasion, when I needed help, the Blessed Virgin made an appearance, engulfing me in her blue and white robes and telling me the secrets of womanhood and of men, about which she was very knowledgeable. The mischievous Mary Magdalene also lent advice. Her long, dark hair, the hair with which she washed the feet of Jesus, mesmerized me. Needless to say, I kept these things to myself. By the time my father died, I was notorious for my beauty and my strangeness. In Pescara, there was nothing for me to do, for despite my beauty, marriage was out of the question. She's as mad as Lucia, I often heard, and she's only good for one thing. And I discovered that thing, and I became very, very good at it, chiefly because my corporal self meant little or nothing, felt little or nothing much. Money was not so hard to get as a result, but trouble came aplenty. Jealous men, possessive men, insignificant men, too many men. So I traveled away when I could to the country churches of Abruzzo. How poor they were in the mountains, and then to Tuscany. Like my mother, I too had become a gypsy of sorts, traveling, stopping home briefly, a shade with none of the normal aspirations that seemed to preoccupy everyone else. A shade who lived by her beauty and the compliance of a body that was mostly numb and separate. I was convinced I was unique, and yet I dearly wished for some sensation, some semblance of what all the others regarded as life. And the closest I came was when I was hurt, when I was drunk or drugged, when I became so anxious that I couldn't breathe or see. Panic, sleeplessness, detachment, visions, everything became too painful, and this foreign earth too much. I resolved to join my parents and my heavenly friends at last, one hot summer day in Prato. I had found the right tree, and I would wait till nightfall to use the noose I made. But to bide my time and kill some time, I stepped into the cool of the cathedral. Filippo Lippi's magnificent fresco of Herod's feast with the dancing Salome, and the Salome who presented the head of St. John the Baptist to her stepmother, this work of art, through all of my resigned anguish, captivated me. In the beautiful face of Salome, I could discern the same sense of impassive detachment, the detachment I had lived with forever, and which I had used, yes, consciously and deliberately employed, and I could see where it would lead. I tried to flee, but a kindly priest found me on the grass outside and persuaded me to return, to say a prayer, to light a candle, and hear the chorales of Bach. Thus began my strange rebirth. The music, the sounds, Lippi's visual display, the incense, the lingering taste of my own vomit in my mouth, the sense of the heavens exploding quietly from the chorus. I started to thaw, to become a whole. I started to do what you, Marcello, and everyone else I know takes for granted, to feel. I came to Venice as a woman reborn and needing to re-educate herself about how to live. I knew that music was my key, and by chance or destiny or luck, there was the music of your incandescent words, music that I and my beauty and my listening had helped to bring into being. The feelings, Marcello, my entire body alive, sensitive as never before as you created, the feelings that were intensified by lack of sleep and food and simple lust and something that seemed like love and a desire to create in turn, to sing in unimaginable ways with words that could throw a person into ecstasy. Please, Marcello, let me talk to you. This was the scrap, the sketch that Olympia gave to the artist she unleashed and whom she, at the time of her giving, notwithstanding what this might do to his fledgling family, wished to possess as a man. I can't say I blame her. I can't say I blame that bastard Marcello either. I hope, Olympia, when you read this, you won't blame me for misrepresenting you. Chapter 18. The older I became, the more experience I accrued, the more I taught and the more or less I wrote. The more I cherished the fable, the tale, the caprice as the absolute jewel of literature. One may scoff, scholars may sneer, professors may disparage, but as time narrows for us and diminishes, it's for the handiwork of the fabulist that I reach, the teller of stories mixing dream and waking life, imagination and the mundane, whose works I can read and read again. Its brevity is, I think, an indispensably attractive feature, brevity and condensation, just as a small, brilliant, and marvelous jewel concentrates a light that is vast, that suffuses us all into its seductive and revealing essence. And of the many objects within the domain of the jeweler, it is the ring that is most fascinating, the closed circle that represents infinity, that in adorning seems as if its purpose is to bind but really sets one free. The sight of the sapphire on Olympia's right hand speaks liberty, as the sight of the trilogy ring on my right hand, its third finger naturally, speaks frivolity. I had the idea to procure a ring after our visit to the Signora Buoninsegna, a ring that wouldn't betoken engagement or marriage, a ring that wouldn't be a statement, and certainly a ring that wouldn't be worn on a pinky. I had never worn a ring in my life, preferring to keep myself trinket-free. But after Olympia's independent return, after Emilia's successful exhibit wherein, thanks no doubt to the mysterious figures of the woman in white, her landscape sold out, after Marcello proved he could stay on the wagon, grumpier and more acidic than ever, but that's another story. I just decided to do something absolutely frivolous, for the hell of it. Well, there's even more to it than that. Olympia, can you imagine this? Had never been to a movie in her life, not even as a kid. Why? I asked incredulously, and I should have known the answer. The images, those large, lifelike, greater-than-life images that, for one as inclined as Olympia to inhabit an otherworldly realm, might have inhabited her, swallowed her up. She was terrified of the idea, and it was only after long and gentle persuasion, in her maturity, that I convinced her to try, with me at her side, and with the caveat that we might also leave at any time should the going get rough or the kitchen get too hot. In fact, I could sympathize with her, for I remember that I, an aficionado of the cinema, fled The Exorcist in panic. I've never told a soul about this, Olympia, not even you. During a scene where, well, I prefer not to say anything further, as I was a young teenager at the time and shouldn't have been allowed entry in the first place. Olympia, with her newfound strength, the strength emboldened by my own strength in not striving to rescue, agreed. And we agreed not to watch one on a television, which we didn't possess, or a computer, but on a screen, a real film screen, preferably at an art house cinema, whether or not the movie was or wasn't art. Few are, let's face it. And it had to be a film that was more patently a fiction than a too absorbing one whose effect, through art, might be too much. No, it should be something relatively light, not too taxing, relatively entertaining without being absolutely stupid. And yes, preferably black and white, the more to keep the distance between a sensitive, first-time observer like Olympia and life. I should also add that since her dramatic emergence from the Adriatic, her sense of humor was much in evidence. We both took it as a sign of maturation, ease, and health. I relished a good practical joke as well as another, particularly when I engineered it, and Olympia took my little jokes with aplomb and mirth. She responded with the occasional witticism, but that was as far as she could go, being a new hand at jocularity. When I received word that Casablanca would be shown in Venice as part of the Biennale for some inexplicable reason connected to some vapidly satirical piece of performance art, I leapt to tell Olympia it would be perfect, and, thank God, it would be subtitled in Italian instead of dubbed like most of the American films that come our way, which of course ruins them entirely. On the night, Olympia dressed to kill. She wasn't afraid to enhance the already entrancing form with a bit of deftly applied makeup and the selection of an especially provocative and elegant taupe dress that complemented her dark olive complexion, hugged her frame, and ended just above the knee. She also sported caramel pumps whose heels brought her nearly up to my height, and I'm fairly tall. I was dressed to teach. Yes, a blue suit, what I often wore to classes, though with a newly purchased lavender tie that had a subtly evanescent sheen. Not too much, but something never to be seen in academia, or at any rate in my classroom. In any case, in matters of dress, the male half of the couple should have a supporting role, so I told myself. At the Palazzo del Cinema on the Lido, where Casablanca was being screened, I stood out like a sore but lucky thumb. Sore because I felt like a bum compared to the international clientele who sported threads costing thousands and jewels whose presence en masse nearly blinded, and I'm talking about the men. Lucky because I had the most prominent jewel of all hanging on my arm. It gave me great pleasure to imagine what the upper echelon were thinking about me, such as, "He must be loaded. How else to explain her?" We took our seats. Olympia caught most every eye and relished it, and the familiar movie began. I knew most of the dialogue by heart, of course, so I could concentrate on other aspects of the film and also check in to make sure Olympia remained grounded. Unreal as the fiction was, the scenes flowed, one into another, so fluidly that I was again captivated. In those days in Hollywood, directors were not yet aware they were auteurs, so they refined the craft of engaging an audience and moving things along. And as Casablanca wore on, it was moving quite splendidly, and Olympia was grinning. When the Marseillaise was taken up by the French-leaning crowd to drown out a Nazi song in Rick's Café Américain, the art-savvy audience of the Biennale chimed in with lusty, self-conscious verve. I cringed a bit at the display, and Olympia gave me a look as if to say, "You were worried about me being nuts?" As I relaxed and enjoyed the show, I enjoyed noting little things, and several such things stood out for me. One was Captain Renault's curious use of the phrase, "A precedent is being broken." Precedents are usually set, I thought. Was my English lacking? The next was Victor Laszlo's lightweight woolen off-white suit, whose magnificent double-breasted jacket with its wide lapels dropped down nearly to the middle of the thigh, absolutely exquisite. Apparently resistance fighters on the run kept up expensive taste in tailoring. Third, and most curious for me, was Rick's ring. Bogart wore it on the third finger of his right hand. I had never noticed it before, but there it was, casually appearing and disappearing all throughout the film. Rick had it in Paris when he was wooing Bergman, and he had it in Morocco, so it must not have been an engagement or a wedding ring. No, it was a man's declaration of freedom. I was mesmerized by it, and I tried to make out its composition. A diamond flanked by two stones set in an undoubtedly gold band, from what I could discern. That was saying something, I said to myself, as I glanced at my own ringless hands, which Olympia, as the movie ended, squeezed. "What do you think? How did you like it?" I eagerly asked. Olympia, with the dispersing crowd's gaze upon her as we left the theater, said she found it charming in its way, a nice little fairy tale. My concerns about her transportation into or onto any unearthly realms had been unfounded, and she clearly didn't clamor for any further excursions to the cinema. "But it's wonderful to have a night out to ourselves, isn't it?" she said, sensing my disappointment, while thankfully leaning against my shoulder as she held my arm. I smiled and agreed and celebrated our stepping out, feeling quite jubilant. But I was very conscious of the very poor sartorial figure I had cut. As we journeyed home across the water in the cool night's bracing air, I recalled how the Doges of Venice every year had dropped a ring into the Adriatic to symbolize the union of the great city and the sea that encompassed it. And as we sped across the dark waves, I found my solution. I wasn't about to spend a fortune I didn't have on fancy suits, though I did think it might be possible to have a nice one like Paul Henreid's. Surely that wouldn't be too extravagant. But I also thought that perhaps, at my time and station in life, I should have something a little more exceptional and enduring to signify that I was a guy to be reckoned with. A ring. A real man's ring, just for the hell of it. A ring that would remedy any problems of esteem. I took the Signora Buoninsegna aside secretly during our next visit to her in Florence, and I took the risk of confiding in her my aspirations to acquire a ring like Bogey's. To my surprise, she seemed delighted, perhaps because it reawakened the jeweler in her. And within minutes, she had sketched out a draft of the piece I was trying to describe, a yellow gold tapered band set with a central half-carat diamond flanked by two natural blue sapphires, all flush-mounted. It was perfect. "It will be expensive," she warned, "but I know who can make it for you, and I can save you a little too." "Signora, I would be so grateful, but please, don't breathe a word to Olympia. I want to surprise her." "I realize it's not so practical," I began. She interrupted me. "Nonsense," she declared. "My father used his ring to advantage during the war. It makes a punch much more damaging should you need to defend yourself. But nothing less than 18-karat gold, Donato. Leave it to me. As for the suit, go to Cisternino. He will take care of you. And take your wife with you. She will enjoy it. Women like these kinds of activities, Donato, especially when they still like their husbands." Then she sized my finger and sent me off. Olympia was all for my acquiring the garment, and when I made the request at the famed tailoring house on the Via del Purgatorio, she watched closely as my measure was taken. We were promised the suit in 2 months' time, perfect for another weekend with the Signora. At that time, too, if all went according to plan, the Signora would have my specially made ring. The next few weeks crawled by at a glacial tempo. I called the Signora, who was amused, and she quieted my qualms and reported that arrangements had been made. 2 weeks later I called again, and she reassured me that when I arrived with Olympia and the kids in tow in 1 more month, all would be ready. "And please, Signora, this is just between you and me." "Yes, of course. But tell me, is Amelia taking care of herself?" "As far as I know, she has never been better. Her paintings are in demand, and she seems happy. And the hair? Is she still dyeing her hair?" "Yes." "I think it is wise for her to do so. White does not become her, not at her age, not yet. Don't you agree?" "I guess so," I replied noncommittally, reminded of my first glimpse of her new hair color, which wasn't far off from her old one, only considerably more scintillating. "She's an attractive woman, Donato, squandering herself on that imbecile." She paused, and then after a full 10 seconds of silence, resumed. "Well, life is strange." "Indeed, Signora. Your ring will be splendid. I hope your wife will appreciate it." On the way down to Fiesole, Olympia cautioned me to slow down so many times that I nearly lost my concentration as we sped to the Signora's. "What's the hurry, darling? We'll get there," she said. We did get there, a good half-hour sooner than usual, and once there, the Signora welcomed us and advised that the suit at Cisternino's was ready and waiting, which Olympia and I retrieved after lunch. It was dashing. It fit like a glove. No, it fit like a perfectly tailored, custom-made item worthy of a Victor Laszlo defying evil and barbarism with suavity. And Olympia was grinning ear to ear. The Signora complimented me and then suggested that Olympia take the children for a stroll while I helped her with a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Once they had exited, she produced the much-awaited ring and slipped it on my finger. It really was exquisite. Pure brazen elegance, not too flashy, but not shy. The natural sapphires were a deep blue, and the central diamond glowed. Yes, a man's ring, I thought, and accoutred as I was in Paul Henry's off-white summer threads, I thought I could take on the world. "I'll surprise Olympia after we get home," I told the Signora. "Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. But you can pay me the 4,000 euros it cost, and that was with haggling." I didn't gasp because she had warned me 3 weeks ahead, but I gulped. "That's a lot for something I really don't need, Signora," I said as I slowly pulled out the cash. "Who said you don't need it?" she responded. I wanted to embrace her for that, but thought better of it. The Signora was not an embracing type, I remembered. Instead, I took her hand and she offered a cheek. "Donato, take care of them, will you?" "Of course, Signora. I love them to bits." "I don't mean the children." "Oh." Keep an eye on Amelia for me. You know how she can get. Don't think I don't know what you did for her. I promise to do my best. Back in Treviso, I restrained my enthusiasm until the next Saturday morning, when I made my entrance for breakfast sporting the ring and feeling every bit myself and more. Olympia, who never missed a beat and who never failed to observe the slightest cue, said nothing. That was odd. I made sure to elevate my coffee cup as I drank, the better to display the new acquisition, but still no response. Throughout the day, despite my subtle efforts to show the ring to advantage, Olympia was oblivious. Perhaps she was preoccupied. Well, her preoccupation endured. All week long I wore the piece, and all week long I got nothing in response. I was frustrated and perplexed, so much so that I thought of doing the unthinkable, asking her outright, until reason and better judgment took hold. I went so far as to don the classy cream-colored bespoke ensemble, jacket and trousers, hoping it might set her eye in motion. Still nothing. So I let it ride, another empty week, until the recriminations began. How could I be so foolish as to waste so much money on something that didn't register on the one person it was meant to have registered upon? I was crestfallen, humiliated by my own frivolity, humbled too by my own vanity, and resigned. So I removed the artifact, beautiful and striking though it certainly was, and put it away, hoping I might pawn it off and cut my losses. The next morning at breakfast, Olympia approached me with consternation. "What's wrong, Donato? What happened?" she said with urgency. "What do you mean?" I replied. "Your beautiful ring. Please don't tell me you've lost it." "You mean you noticed it?" "Noticed it? I couldn't keep my eyes off it these past 2 weeks. But you didn't say anything. You never told me." "What could I have said? What was there to say? That it made a better person out of you?" "No, but or that it made you handsomer?" "Well, I'm not, or that it made you look much richer than you really are?" I was speechless after that one, so I merely swallowed a little, searching for a retort. But Olympia carried on. "Or that you think Nonna would really keep a secret of that magnitude?" she slyly inquired. And then she laughed and laughed and laughed until I ran to my desk, fetched the ring, put it on, ran back to the kitchen, and popped open a bottle of Acqua Minerale, taking care to show the ornament in the bright morning light as I poured the sparkling water. I raised the glass. My dear Olympia had broken with precedent by breaking my monopoly on jokes. It was all coming together. Thank you.